A small tracked carrier entered British paperwork quietly. Clerks filed it under light tracked utility. Drawings specified simple plates and simple angles. The design accepted thin armour as a constraint. The objective stayed transport, not decisive combat. Procurement language stressed quantity and availability. Trial notes treated it as a carrier first. Designation practice shifted across memos and revisions. The term carrier stayed consistent in stores' ledgers. A vehicle length suited narrow lanes and tracks. A compact width matched rail loading limitations. A low silhouette reduced stowage volume in depots. The hull used flat plates for repeatable cutting. Plate edges required deburring before fit-up. Fitters checked squareness with basic shop squares. Rivets appeared in early production documentation. Welded seams expanded as welding capacity grew. Records vary on exact transition points. Inspection sheets tracked porosity and lack of fusion defects. Welding jigs held side plates during heat cycles. Distortion required straightening on press fixtures. Straightening marks appeared under later paint layers. Paint shops applied primer over cleaned steel. Surface preparation depended on available abrasives. Oil contamination caused adhesion failures on some batches. Rework orders specified degreasing before repaint. The carrier used a front driving sprocket arrangement. Track tension remained a daily maintenance item. Mechanics logged slack adjustments in unit notebooks. Tension too tight increased bearing temperatures. Tension too loose threw tracks in turns. Thrown tracks produced recovery delays and congestion. Recovery parties carried track pins and punches. A punch set lived in small tool rolls. Tool rolls were listed on issue vouchers. Missing tools triggered chargeable loss entries. The suspension used the small road wheels in pairs. Small wheels eased individual replacement in the field. Wheel hubs used bearings sensitive to grit intrusion. Grease nipples required frequent attention. Grease quality varied under supply pressure. Low-grade grease separated under heat and water. Separated grease increased wear on races. Wear presented as rumble during slow movement. Drivers reported rumble on defect forms. Workshops confirmed with wheel spin tests. Track shoes carried mud and stones into runs. Stones scored idlers and guide horns. Scoring reduced track guidance under sideload. Sideload increased during evasive steering inputs. And steering relied on differential braking and clutching. Brake linings glazed after prolonged descents. Glazing lengthened stopping distance on slopes. Maintenance schedules included lining inspection intervals. Intervals shifted when operational tempo increased. Workshop foremen annotated deviations on routine cards. The engine compartment sat rearward in many builds. Heat management required louvers and airflow paths. Air filters clogged rapidly in dry theatres. Clogging reduced power and increased fuel consumption. Drivers cleaned filters using brush and compressed air. Compressed air access depended on unit compressors. Without compressors, cleaning relied on tapping and shaking. Tapping damaged filter media when done aggressively. Damaged media passed dust into cylinders. Dust ingestion accelerated ring and bore wear. Their wear showed as blow-by and oil carryover. Oil carryover fouled plugs in petrol engines. Fouled plugs caused misfire under load. Misfire complaints appeared in driver defect logs. Fitters carried spare plugs in ration tins. Ration tins doubled as parts containers. Container improvisation appeared in photographic evidence. Factory parts bins used labelled wooden drawers. Drawer labels matched parts lists and drawing numbers. Drawing numbers controlled ordering and substitution authority. Unauthorized substitutions triggered correspondence with depots. Depots required signatures for non-standard issue. Signatures moved through adjutant offices and stores. Paperwork friction delayed small repairs. The carrier used a simple open-topped fighting compartment. Open-top reduced weight and eased loading. An opener-top increased exposure to debris and weather. Canvas covers appeared on some issue scales. Canvas required waterproofing treatment from quartermasters. Treatment supplies fluctuated with chemical availability. Canvas shrank when dried near engine heat. Shrunken canvas strained fastening loops. Broken loops led to lost covers. Lost covers increased corrosion on stowed equipment. Corrosion appeared on brackets and seat frames. Seat frames used tubular steel or pressed forms. Pressed forms depended on press tooling capacity. Tooling capacity competed with other war contracts. Production committees allocated press time by priority. Priority shifted during operational crises. Shifted priority changed delivery schedules. Schedule changes forced chassis storage in yards. Yard storage required tarpaulins and drainage. Her poor drainage pooled water in hull corners. Pooled water promoted rust at lap joints. Rust repairs required wire brushing and repaint. Repaint used whatever shade stock existed. Shade variation created patchwork fleet appearances. Fleet appearance was not a procurement concern. The carrier accepted many roll kits. Kits were documented as mounting sets and stowage sets. Mounting sets used drilled holes and brackets. Brackets were standardized to reduce machining. Standardization reduced gauge variety on lines. Gauges still required regular calibration. Calibration logs carried dates and inspector initials. Miscalibrated gauges produced misaligned mounting holes. Misaligned holes forced reaming on assembly. Reaming increased burr risk at edges. Burrs cut hands during hurried installation. First aid entries note lacerations from sheet edges. Edge radiusing was often minimal. Time pressure discouraged cosmetic finishing. Finishing focused on functional contact surfaces. Contact surfaces included bearing seats and splines. Spline wear caused backlash in drivetrain components. Backlash produced clunking during throttle changes. Drivers adapted by smoother pedal control. Training notes emphasized gentle clutch engagement. Clutch plates overheated under aggressive starts. Overheating warped plates and reduced friction. Reduced friction created slip in mud. Slip increased heat again in a feedback loop. Workshop reports recommended driver retraining. Retraining competed with operational demands. Operational demands prioritized movement over instruction. The carrier carried infantry sections in constrained space. And space limitations forced strict stowage discipline. Stowage diagrams appeared on unit notice boards. Diagrams showed weapon placement and ammunition boxes. Boxes used standard patterns for interchangeability. Interchangeability reduced confusion in mixed formations. Mixed formations still created inventory mismatches. Mismatch reports went to brigade ordnance sections. Ordnance sections requested transfers via forms. Form routing added days to simple needs. The carrier also served as ammunition hauler. Ammunition loads stressed suspension and track pins. Track pins were oval under repeated shock. Oval pins loosened joints under power. Loose joints increased track slap. Track slap damaged hull side plates. Damage required rivet replacement or patch welding. Patch welding demanded portable generators. Generators required fuel allocation and transport. Fuel allocation created its own paperwork chain. Chits matched barrels issued to workshops. Chits were audited against vehicle logs. Audit discrepancies triggered inquiries and memos. The carrier became a machine gun platform. Mounting a gun required stable pintle geometry. Pintle geometry depended on bracket stiffness. Thin plates flexed under sustained traverse forces. Flex affected aiming repeatability. Crews used improvised braces in some cases. Improvised braces varied by unit workshop practice. Practice differences complicated spares forecasting. Forecasting relied on standard bills of material. Bills of material lagged behind field modifications. Lag created shortages of small fasteners. Fasteners were often the limiting component. A missing bolt halted a mounting job. As stores clerks issued bolts by weight in bins. Weight issue caused mixed thread problems. Mixed thread caused cross-threading and stripping. Stripped threads forced helicoil-type repairs or retapping. Retapping removed material from already thin brackets. Thin brackets cracked near holes. Cracks propagated with vibration. Vibration increased on hard road movement. Hard road movement occurred during rapid redeployment. Redeployment stressed track rubber elements where fitted. Where rubber existed, oil softened it. Softened rubber delaminated from metal backing. Delamination created uneven ride and noise. Noise was not a primary acceptance criterion. Acceptance criteria focused on mobility and basic reliability. Reliability was measured through controlled mileage trials. Trial notes indicate repeated component swaps. Those swaps documented part numbers and failure observations. Failure observations used plain language and sketches. Sketches marked fracture surfaces and wear patterns. Wear patterns showed dust, water, or overload signatures. Overload often came from mission creep. Mission creep placed heavy weapons on light chassis. Chassis accepted the load until failures appeared. Failures appeared first as bent brackets. Bent brackets progressed into cracked weld toes. Cracked weld toes grew under cyclic loading. Inspection teams looked for paint cracking lines. Paint cracking indicated metal movement underneath. Movement required grinding and rewelding. Grinding consumed abrasive wheels in quantity. Abrasive wheel supply competed with other industries. Supply constraints forced hand filing as substitute. Hand filing lengthened repair times. The long repair times reduced vehicle availability. Availability was tracked on unit strength returns. Returns were compiled nightly by clerks. Clerks reconciled returns with workshop lists. Workshop lists used chalkboards and ledger books. Ledger books recorded jobs by serial number. Serial numbers were stamped on plates. Stamp quality varied with dieware. Worn dies produced ambiguous digits. Ambiguous digits created misidentification in returns. Misidentification led to duplicate entries. Duplicates required correction by headquarters staff. Corrections arrived as typed amendments. Typed amendments carried reference numbers and dates. Dates on amendments did not always match action dates. Records vary on the sequence of some changes. The carrier served as a mortar carrier in variants. And mortar mounting demanded recoil management considerations. Recoil management used base plates and braces. Braces transferred forces into hull structure. Hull structure flexed under repeated firing. Flex loosened rivets in riveted builds. Loose rivets rattled and elongated holes. Elongated holes reduced clamp force. Reduced clamp force invited water ingress. Water ingress corroded hidden seams. Hidden seams were hard to inspect. Inspection relied on tapping and visual lines. Field conditions limited thorough inspection time. The carrier also hauled wounded as an improvised ambulance. Stretcher arrangements used simple rails and straps. Straps wore against sharp corners. Sharp corners required edge protection pads. Pads were often absent or improvised. Improvised pads came from scrap canvas or rubber. A scrap supply depended on workshop scavenging. Scavenging competed with waste disposal requirements. Waste disposal required burn pits or dumping sites. Dumping sites were controlled by local orders. Local orders altered workshop routines. The carrier's drivetrain demanded regular oil changes. Oil changes required drain pans and funnels. Funnels were commonly lost or damaged. Damaged funnels spilled oil onto clutch housings. Oil on clutch housings attracted dust. Dust formed abrasive paste around linkages. Abrasive paste stiffened controls. Stiff controls increased driver effort. Increased effort produced slower response in emergencies. Emergency response was discussed in safety bulletins. Safety bulletins described rollover and ejection risks. Open top increased ejection probability. Seatbelts were generally not standard. Without belts, the crews braced with knees and elbows. Bracing altered weapon handling stability. Stability influenced firing accuracy on the move. On the move firing was not always doctrinal. Doctrine evolved through lessons and circulars. Circulars referenced carrier employment in general terms. General terms left room for unit improvisation. Improvisation created non-standard configurations. Non-standard configurations stressed spares systems. Spare systems used depots and forward issue points. Forward issue points carried limited stock lines. Limited lines forced cannibalization from disabled hulls. Cannibalization was recorded in salvage tags. Salvage tags listed parts removed and destination. Destinations were sometimes vague under pressure. Vague destinations complicated later accounting. Accounting teams pursued missing parts after campaigns. Parts recovery rarely matched paperwork accuracy. The carrier's track design demanded pin retention systems. Retention systems included split pins or locking plates. Locking plates bent when struck by debris. Bent plates released pins gradually. Gradual release created sudden track separation. Track separation often occurred during turning. Turning placed high lateral stress onto joints. High stress increased when overloaded. Overload happened with extra ammunition and fuel. Extra fuel was carried in jerrycans. Jerrycan stowage used brackets on exterior. Exterior brackets caught branches in tight terrain. Branches tore brackets from thin plates. Torn plates required patching or replacement sections. Replacement sections came from depot repair kits. Repair kits were not always stock forward. Absent kits forced local fabrication. Local fabrication used mild steel from scrap piles. Scrap piles contained unknown grades and thicknesses. Unknown thickness changed bracket stiffness unpredictably. Unpredictable stiffness led to repeated failures. Repeated failures generated recurring work orders. Work orders increased workshop backlog. Backlog management required prioritization boards. Boards listed vehicles by operational urgency. Urgency ratings were assigned by squadron commanders. Commanders balanced movement needs against mechanical risk. Risk acceptance appeared in marginal notes. Marginal notes rarely survived archival filtering. The carrier's simplicity supported rapid driver training. Training still required track discipline and spacing rules. Spacing rules reduced bunching under artillery threat. Threat context influenced movement speeds and routes. Route choice affected mechanical wear patterns. Soft ground increased track and wheel load. Hard ground increased vibration and fastener loosening. Fastener loosening required routine tightening checks. Checks used spanners issued in toolkits. Toolkit completeness was inspected periodically. Inspections used checklists with tick boxes. Tick boxes were sometimes pre-marked under haste. Pre-marking reduced inspection effectiveness. Reduced effectiveness allowed minor faults to grow. Fault growth led to major breakdowns in transit. Breakdowns required towing or recovery. Towing used chains or tow bars. Chains snapped if loads exceeded ratings. Ratings were not always known in the field. Unknown ratings encouraged conservative towing speeds. Low speeds delayed column schedules. Schedule delays triggered revised movement orders. Revised orders created confusion at junction points. Junction confusion caused detours and extra mileage. Extra mileage increased fuel consumption. Fuel consumption stressed already tight fuel plans. Fuel plans were compiled at higher headquarters. Headquarters used tonnage estimates and vehicle counts. Counts were sometimes outdated by battle losses. Loss reporting lag created inaccurate forecasts. Inaccurate forecasts produced shortfalls at issue points. Shortfalls forced vehicles to wait. Waiting increased engine idling time. Idling overheated engines in poor airflow. Overheat was managed by shutting down and venting. Shutting down reduced readiness for sudden movement. The carrier's manufacturing aimed for distributed production. Distributed production reduced dependence on single factories. Distributed sites required consistent drawings and tolerances. Tolerances were simplified to suit available machine tools. Simplified tolerances improved interchangeability. Interchangeability still suffered from wear and field repairs. Field repairs introduced misalignment and distortion. Distortion affected track alignment and sprocket wear. Sprocket teeth wore into hooked profiles. Hooked profiles accelerated track wear. Accelerated wear increased spare track demand. Demand created pressure on rubber and steel supply. Steel supply fluctuated with shipping and allocation. Allocation decisions were recorded in committee minutes. Minutes referenced competing needs across vehicle types. Vehicle types included tanks, lorries, and carriers. Carriers benefited from low material consumption per unit. The low consumption supported high output under constraint. Output claims differ across secondary sources. Surviving notes do not confirm precise totals. Many sources describe very large production numbers. Most produced claims depend on definition and counting method. Counting method varies by nation and variant scope. Variants included machine gun carriers and mortar carriers. Variants also included radio carriers and command carriers. Radio fit demanded power supply and antenna mounts. Power supply used dynamos or generators as specified. Generator brackets cracked under vibration. Cracks required reinforcement plates. Reinforcement plates changed electromagnetic grounding paths. Grounding faults caused radio interference issues. Interference complaints reached signals maintenance sections. And signal sections issued fault-finding procedures. Procedures referenced continuity tests and cable routing. Cable routing had to avoid hot exhaust surfaces. Heat damaged insulation and caused shorts. Shorts blew fuses and stopped sets. Fuse availability became a small but persistent issue. Fuses were stocked in tiny containers. Containers were easily lost in mud and dark. Loss produced improvisation with wrong fuse ratings. Wrong ratings risked harness overheating. Harness overheating risked compartment fires. Fire risk was higher near fuel lines. Fuel lines required secure clips and grommets. Grommets degraded with oil exposure. Degraded grommets allowed chafing at bulkheads. Chafing produced pinhole leaks. Leaks smelled strongly, prompting quick action. Quick action involved shut-off and absorbent rags. Rags were then disposed per local rules. Local rules varied by commander and location. The carrier's armour plate thickness stayed limited by role. Limited thickness improved mobility and transportability. Transportability mattered for rail and ship loading. Loading required lashing points and tie-down procedures. Tie-down procedures were written on loading cards. Cards specified chain angles and chock placement. Chocks were made from timber blocks. Timber quality varied by supply region. Poor timber split under repeated lash tension. Split blocks allowed movement in transit. Transit movement damaged paint and fittings. Damaged fittings required depot attention on arrival. Depot attention competed with turnaround demands. Turnaround demands reduced inspection time. Reduced inspection time increased in-service defect rates. The defect rates were monitored through returns and reports. Reports moved upward through administrative channels. Channels used stamped envelopes and registry numbers. Registries logged each incoming and outgoing letter. Lost letters triggered duplicate submissions. Duplicate submissions added clerical workload. Clerical workload produced delays in technical replies. Technical replies sometimes arrived after field solutions existed. Field solutions were then formalized retroactively. Retroactive formalization altered later production instructions. Instruction changes required toolroom updates. Toolrooms machined new fixtures and drill jigs. Jigs were hardened or left soft by necessity. Soft jigs wore quickly and drifted. Drift created hole position errors. Errors forced hand fitting and slotting. Slotting weakened joint integrity. Their weak joints loosened under vibration. The carrier's simplicity still demanded disciplined lubrication routines. Routines were printed on maintenance plates or manuals. Manuals were sometimes missing from vehicle stowage. Missing manuals forced reliance on memory. Memory varied with driver experience. Experience grew through repetition, not formal schooling. Schooling time was limited by manpower needs. Manpower needs drew mechanics into frontline units. Frontline units lacked full workshop facilities. Facilities limitations shaped repair methods. Methods included cold chisels, hammers, and improvised presses. Improvised presses used vehicle jacks and timber. Timber compressed and slipped under load. Slippage created injuries and damaged parts. Damage increased scrap rates for scarce components. Scrap rates were tracked in workshop summaries. Summaries were forwarded to higher ordnance commands. Commands requested corrective actions from manufacturers. Manufacturers responded with design notes and changes. Change control required drawing amendments and reissue. Reissue required printing capacity and distribution. Distribution lag left old and new parts mixed. Mixed parts caused assembly confusion. Confusion showed as mismatched brackets and holes. Mismatches caused delays on lines. Line delays reduced weekly output targets. Targets were reported against planned figures. Planned figures were sometimes optimistic under constraint. Constraint included machine tool wear and staff shortages. Staff shortages increased overtime and fatigue. Fatigue produced inspection misses and assembly errors. Their errors were caught later in acceptance trials. Acceptance trials used measured runs and checks. Checks included steering response and brake effectiveness. Brake effectiveness depended on adjustment and lining quality. Quality was affected by raw material substitution. Substitution required approval through technical branches. Approvals left a trail of correspondence. Correspondence described allowable equivalents and limits. Limits were sometimes ignored under emergency. Emergency deviations were noted after the fact. After the fact notes aimed to prevent repetition. Prevention was uneven across dispersed production. Dispersed production still delivered large quantities. Large quantities enabled ubiquitous presence in units. Ubiquity created diverse use cases and stresses. Stresses revealed edge conditions not in trials. And edge conditions included deep mud and extreme cold. Cold thickened lubricants and slowed cranking. Slow cranking drained batteries quickly. Battery charging depended on generator output. Generator output fell at low engine speeds. Low speeds were used during stealth movement. Stealth movement increased idling and low RPM. Low RPM reduced cooling fan effectiveness. Cooling limits produced overheating even in cool air. Overheating warped heads in worse cases. Warped heads caused coolant loss if water cooled. Water supply was not guaranteed forward. Forward water was prioritized for personnel and radiators. Radiator refills used canteens or buckets. Buckets were often improvised from tins. Tins introduced rust flakes into systems. Rust flakes blocked small passages. Blockage reduced cooling and increased failures. Failures triggered engine swaps where possible. Engine swaps depended on availability of replacement units. Replacement units arrived through ordnance depots. Depots issued engines with paperwork and seals. Seals were broken and recorded on issue. Record keeping supported later accountability checks. Accountability checks happened during quieter periods. Quieter periods were rare during sustained operations. The carrier's role flexibility made it a default solution. Default solutions became habitual in unit planning. Planning referenced carrier availability on operational tables. Tables listed numbers fit for duty. Fit for duty was a judgment call. Judgment depended on driver reports and mechanic assessments. Assessments were influenced by spare parts stock. Stock influenced the willingness to declare unfit. Declaring unfit removed a vehicle from the roster. Roster reduction impacted mission allocation. Mission allocation pressured workshops to accelerate repairs. Accelerated repairs reduced finishing and inspection. Reduced inspection increased recurrence of faults. Recurrence formed a cycle visible in maintenance statistics. Statistics were sometimes compiled using rough estimates. Estimates introduced noise into higher-level conclusions. Despite noise, the pattern supported continuous production. Continuous production required consistent supply of track links. Track link manufacture demanded heat treatment control. Heat treatment variability caused brittleness or softness. Brittle links cracked under impact. Soft links stretched and elongated pin bores. Both outcomes increased track maintenance workload. Workload distribution required assigning fitters by priority. Priority lists changed daily under changing operations. The carrier remained a machine shaped by constraint. Constraint rewarded simple plates, simple mounts, simple service. Serviceability mattered more than refined protection. Protection stayed limited by the weight and role definition. Role definition stayed broad in practice. Practice turned the carrier into routine equipment. Routine equipment generated routine paperwork, routine defects, routine fixes. Routine fixes kept fleets moving with minimal resources. Minimal resources defined the carrier's administrative value. Administrative value translated into sustained procurement approval. Sustained approval maintained tooling investment and production discipline. Discipline kept output stable across varied factories. And the stable output ensured carriers appeared across many fronts. Front usage reinforced further orders through demand signals. Demand signals were formal, not sentimental. They arrived as returns, requisitions, and repair summaries. Those documents sustained a small tracked carrier's permanence.